They laughed when my hand slipped on the frozen rope. They whispered when I couldn't turn the rusted wheel. The first mate even slapped my report off the chart table, calling me tourist trash in uniform. But when that storm hit and the real captain collapsed, my stripes weren't just for show. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had to prove yourself when everyone expected you to fail, this story is for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me about your own comeback moment, and subscribe because you won't believe how this ends. I still remember the smell of diesel and salt water the first time I stepped onto the MV Nordic Fury. It was overwhelming, thick in my throat, mixing with this electric feeling in my chest that I told myself was excitement but was probably closer to terror. 28 years old, freshly certified as a second officer, and this was supposed to be my moment. 4 years of maritime academy, endless exams, simulator hours that blurred into each other until I could navigate storms in my sleep. I'd earned those stripes on my shoulders. At least that's what I kept telling myself as I walked up that gangway with my duffel bag, trying to look like I belonged there. The crew was already watching me. I could feel their eyes before I even saw their faces. There's this thing that happens on ships, this instant assessment where everyone's calculating whether you're going to pull your weight or become a liability, and I knew what they were seeing. I'm small, 5'4", maybe 120 pounds soaking wet, not exactly the imposing figure of authority you picture when you think ship's officer. But I'd proven myself in training. I was quick, precise, and I could read weather patterns better than officers twice my age. That had to count for something, right? Then I met Greaves. The first mate stood on the deck like he owned it, arms crossed over a chest that looked like it had been carved from the same steel as the ship. 20 years at sea, the crew told me later. 20 years of doing things the old way, the hard way, the way that didn't include women on his deck. He looked at me the way you'd look at a stain on your uniform, didn't even shake my hand, just nodded toward the accommodations ladder and said, "Cabins below, try not to get lost." The deckhands nearby smirked, and I felt my face burning as I headed below deck, dragging my bag behind me. My first real test came within hours. We were still in port, preparing to cast off, and I was assigned to help with the mooring lines. Simple stuff, routine. Except the lines were frozen. It was February in the North Atlantic, and everything metal felt like it could crack your bones if you grabbed it wrong. I reached for the rope, trying to coil it properly, and my hands just couldn't grip. The fibers were stiff with ice, my fingers were already going numb despite the gloves, and the line slipped right through my hands. Once. Twice. I could feel the panic rising in my throat because everyone was watching, and I knew how this looked. Maritime Academy must be handing out degrees in gift bags now. Greaves's voice cut across the deck, loud enough that everyone heard it. Loud enough that they were supposed to hear it. I looked up and he was standing there, arms still crossed, not making any move to help, just watching me struggle like it was entertainment. A couple of the deckhands laughed, not even trying to hide it, and I wanted to explain that the line was frozen, that anyone would have trouble with it, that I knew a dozen other ways to secure a vessel, but my throat was tight. And my hands were shaking, and all I could do was finally get the damn rope coiled while my cheeks burned hot enough to melt the ice around me. That was day one. That was the moment I became weak grip Reese to everyone on that ship. 3 weeks at sea and I'd become invisible. That's almost worse than being mocked, you know? At least mockery means they see you. But by week 3, Greaves and the crew had perfected this way of looking right through me, like I was just another piece of equipment that didn't quite work properly. Except I was working. I was monitoring everything, especially the weather systems developing to our northwest. There was this low-pressure system that kept nagging at me, the way it was deepening faster than the forecasts predicted. I'd watch it on radar during my night watches, tracking its movement, and something in my gut kept screaming that we needed to adjust our route. So I prepared a report, spent hours on it, charting the system's trajectory, calculating intercept points, presenting 3 alternative routes. I walked into that chart room with my folder, professional and prepared, and I barely got 2 sentences out before Greaves exploded. He didn't just dismiss me. He slapped the folder right off the chart table, and I watched my hours of work scatter across the floor like trash. You think your little computer predictions mean anything out here? This is real sailing, not a classroom." The other officers in the room went silent. Captain Torin, who could have said something, just stared at the charts like they were suddenly the most fascinating thing in the world. And I was on my hands and knees, collecting my papers, while everyone pretended not to notice. That night in my cabin, I sat on my bunk and stared at my captain's certification hanging on the wall. That piece of paper said I was qualified to command a vessel. But what good were qualifications when nobody would listen? 4 days later, the storm found us, and God, nothing prepares you for a Force 10 storm in the North Atlantic. Nothing. It came at night, of course, because nature has a sixth sense of timing. One moment we were cutting through heavy swells, uncomfortable but manageable. The next, the sky turned this sick greenish-black color, and the wind went from strong to screaming. Waves started hitting 40 feet. These massive walls of water that made our cargo ship feel like a toy. The alarm went off for all hands on deck, and suddenly everyone was moving through chaos, trying to secure cargo that was shifting with every roll of the ship. I was out there with them, salt spray hitting my face like frozen needles, couldn't see more than a few feet through the rain and spume. My size actually helped for once because I could slip between containers, reach straps that the bigger crew members couldn't access. I secured a container that had broken loose, could have caused catastrophic damage if it kept sliding. My hands were bleeding from the cold and the metal, but I got it done. Greaves saw me do it. Didn't say a word. Then the call came over the radio. "Bridge emergency. Captain down." I ran up those stairs with my heart trying to punch through my ribs, and when I burst through the bridge door I saw Captain Torin on the floor, conscious but gray-faced, clutching his chest. Heart attack. We were 200 miles from land and no helicopter could fly in this weather, which meant command fell to Greaves. And I watched his face as that reality hit him, watched him look out at those massive waves, and I saw something I never expected to see from him. I saw pure, absolute terror. The first mate was freezing, and we were all about to die because of it. Greaves was shouting orders that contradicted each other. "Turn to port. No, hold steady. Reduce speed. Increase power." The helmsman's knuckles were white on the wheel, eyes darting between Greaves and the instruments, not knowing which command to follow. And then Greaves said the words that made my blood go cold. "We need to turn the ship. We need to run with these waves." In seas like this, turning broadside to 40-foot waves would roll us. We'd capsize within minutes, and everyone on this bridge knew it. But Greaves was spiraling, his 20 years of experience crumbling under pressure he'd never actually faced before. A massive wave hit and the bridge window cracked, spiderweb fractures spreading across the glass, and Greaves actually stepped backward, his voice breaking. "We're going to die. We need to abandon ship." That's when something clicked in me. Not confidence exactly, more like clarity. Like every moment of my training suddenly aligned into this single point of purpose. I stepped forward, and my voice came out steady in a way that surprised even me. "Greaves, step aside." He turned to look at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. His eyes were wild, unfocused. Around us, the emergency lights were flashing red and white, casting these sharp shadows across the bridge, and I could see my reflection in the cracked window, those officers' stripes on my shoulders catching the light. They almost seemed to glow. I said it again, louder this time. "Step aside or we all die. I'm taking command." For a moment, everything hung there. The ship rolled violently and we all grabbed for support, but nobody moved. Then Captain Torin, semi-conscious on the floor where the medic was working on him, whispered something. The medic leaned down, then looked up at us. He says, "Let her command." I saw something break in Greaves then, the last of his resistance crumbling, and he stepped away from the center of the bridge. And just like that, the ship was mine. My first order cut through the chaos. "Helm, maintain heading 340. Don't fight the wheel, work with it. Engine room, I need 60% power, keep the revs steady." My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like my instructor's, like every captain I'd ever studied, like something that belonged in this moment. The helmsman responded immediately, his shoulders dropping slightly with relief at having clear direction. "Aye, heading 340, ma'am." I could feel the ship respond, the bow biting into the next wave instead of wallowing. We weren't fighting the storm anymore. We were dancing with it. Hour after hour, I didn't leave that bridge. My hands weren't gripping anything tightly because they didn't need to. This wasn't about force. It was about reading the waves, timing the troughs, making micro-adjustments that kept us stable. Every skill I'd learned, every simulator hour, every mocked moment of my computer predictions, it all meant something now. I could hear the crew below passing the word, voices crackling over the radio. "The second officer's commanding. She knows what she's doing." One of the old deckhands, a guy who'd never spoken directly to me, came on the radio and said something that made my throat tight. "She's got the touch. The ship's listening to her." And for the first time since I'd stepped aboard the Nordic Fury, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The storm broke just before dawn. I watched the sky lighten from that angry black to gray, then finally to this pale, exhausted blue. The waves calmed to rolling swells, and the wind dropped from a scream to a whisper. My legs were shaking from standing for 8 straight hours, my voice was hoarse from giving commands, and there was dried blood on my hands from when I'd gone out on deck to secure that cargo hatch myself. Yeah, I did that. When the hatch started showing stress, when it looked like it might flood and sink us, I made the call. Greaves wanted to go, probably trying to redeem himself, but I told him I needed him on the bridge. The truth was simpler. I was the smallest, the fastest, and I knew I could do it. So I went out into what felt like the end of the world, clipped my safety line, and worked those emergency clamps with hands that were too cold to feel anymore. The crew pulled me back just as a wave tried to take me over the side, and I walked back to the bridge soaking wet and bleeding, and I didn't stop commanding, not for a second. When the helicopter finally came for Captain Torin, the seas were calm enough for the rescue. They strapped him to the basket, and before they lifted him, he grabbed my hand with surprising strength. His face was still gray, but his eyes were clear. "You saved us all, Reese. Best command decision I never made was letting you take that bridge." Then he was gone, rising up into the sky, and I was left standing on a damaged ship with a crew that was looking at me differently now. Not with mockery, not with doubt, with something that felt uncomfortably like respect. 2 days later, we limped into port. The company officials were waiting, along with Coast Guard investigators. There had to be an inquiry any time command changed hands during an emergency, and technically, I'd violated protocol by taking command from a superior officer. I sat in that office and gave my full report, every detail, every decision. I didn't try to make myself sound heroic. I just told them what happened. But then they called in the crew testimonies, and that's when I realized how much had changed. Every single crew member, from the deckhands who'd laughed at me to the engineers who'd barely known my name, they all said the same thing. I was the only reason they survived. The helmsman broke down during his testimony, said he'd been certain he was going to die until I took command, and then Greaves testified. The man who'd slapped my reports off the table, who'd called me weak, who'd made my first weeks aboard a living hell. He sat in that chair and he said, "I froze. She didn't. I've been at sea for 20 years and I've never seen anyone command like that. She's a natural captain." His voice cracked when he said it, and I realized he wasn't just testifying, he was confessing. He found me later, before I left the ship for the last time. We stood on the deck where he'd first mocked my grip on that frozen rope, and he looked older somehow, smaller. "I was wrong," he said, "about everything. You have the strongest grip I've ever seen, just not where I was looking." He explained his own fear, his terror of being exposed as inadequate, and then he said something I'll never forget. "You didn't just save the ship, Reese. You saved me from killing everyone with my pride." 6 months later, I'm standing on the bridge of the MV Aurora Sky, my own command. At 28, I'm the youngest captain in the company's history. They didn't give me this ship because of what happened in the storm. Well, not just because of that. They gave it to me because I proved something that night. I proved that strength isn't about how hard you can grip a frozen rope or how loud you can shout orders. It's about knowing what to hold on to when everything's falling apart. My crew is different now. I chose them myself. Young, diverse, skilled people who remind me of who I was when I first stepped onto the Nordic Fury. And when I see someone struggling, when I see that panic in their eyes because they think they're not strong enough or big enough or experienced enough, I remember what that felt like. I remember being invisible. I remember being mocked. And I make sure they know that their value isn't measured by someone else's narrow definition of strength. Last week, I was training a new junior officer, a young woman who was struggling with some equipment. I could see the frustration building in her, that fear that she wasn't cut out for this, and I told her something I wish someone had told me on day one. The sea doesn't care about your grip strength. It cares about your judgment. It cares about whether you can think clearly when everyone else is panicking. That's the strength that matters out here. She asked me a question that stopped me cold. What if they don't respect me? What if they never believe I can do this? And I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw myself collecting papers off that chart room floor. I saw myself with bleeding hands on a frozen deck. I saw myself taking command while a first mate fell apart, and I smiled. Then let the storm prove who you are, I said. Your stripes don't glow because you wear them. They glow when you earn them. And sometimes you have to earn them in the worst conditions imaginable. But when you do, nobody can ever take that away from you. They thought weak hands meant weak command. They thought my size made me insufficient, my gender made me incapable, my quiet nature made me forgettable. But I learned something in that storm that I carry with me every single day. The tightest grip in the world means nothing if you're holding the wrong thing. I held on to my training, I held on to my calm, I held on to my purpose, and that's what saved us. My stripes glowed under those storm lights, not because of some miracle, not because the universe decided to prove a point. They glowed because in that moment, standing on that bridge with 40-foot waves trying to kill us all, I finally knew without doubt that I had earned them. Every mocked moment, every dismissive comment, every time someone looked through me like I didn't exist, it all led to that storm. And in that storm, I found out exactly who I was. I'm Captain Reese Calloway now. And these stripes don't just glow in emergency lights anymore. They glow every single day because I know what they cost. I know what they mean. And I know that I earned every thread of them. So if someone's ever called you weak, if they've ever mocked what makes you different, remember this: strength isn't one thing. Sometimes the qualities they mock are exactly what saves the day. My weak grip taught me to use technique over brute force. My quiet nature taught me to think clearly when everyone else was shouting. My size taught me to be precise instead of overwhelming. And those captain stripes? They didn't glow because of the storm. They glowed because I finally knew I'd earned them. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to prove yourself when no one believed in you, hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments about a time you turned your supposed weakness into your greatest strength. I read every single comment, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And subscribe, because every week I bring you stories about people who refuse to let others define their limits. Your comeback moment might be just one storm away. Thank you for listening to my story. Now go out there and earn your own stripes. The world is waiting to see them glow.